What did I say about the music?
Awesome.
Oh, absolutely awesome. Oh, man. Good morning, everybody. Usually it takes a little bit of time for people to trickle in. LinkedIn's usually delayed just a little bit, so I'll give it a few seconds before we jump into the show today that I'm super excited for. Got a couple amazing guests, Chris Tabb, Collin Graves. You guys gentlemen want to introduce yourselves real quick?
Yeah, Chris Tabb, CCO of LEIT Data. Been around the data world longer than I like to admit, and defender of the mean data streets.
You do it well. Collin Graves, founder of North Labs. Been in the cloud data space for the past 17 years, and one of Chris's guardians of the data streets for sure.
That's right, the mean data streets, something that Chris is always posting about that I love. It's crazy. The data streets have gotten mean, haven't they, Chris?
They have. In fact, some of the things are mean in DataOps world, so we can talk about some of those 5 areas of meanness there. I think there's an opportunity to simplify things and make them less mean, and I think that's my mission really.
Cool. Just as a quick question to the audience, I always love seeing where everybody's calling in from. So if you don't mind just posting where you're at right now, it's always nice to see the global audience that we bring to the Coffees with Coalesce. While we're waiting, I'll introduce myself, Armon Petrossian, the CEO at Coalesce. I've got my beloved co-founder here, Mr. Satish. I'll let you give your own introduction.
Yeah, I'm Satish Jayanthi, co-founder and CTO at Coalesce, partner in crime with Armon.
That's right. Cool. So shall we jump right into it? It looks like the comments are coming through now. We got London, Denver. Oh, you could probably go meet up with them, Chris. Minnesota, Minneapolis, a lot of Midwest in the house. Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, Tunisia. Haven't heard that one in a minute. Hey, Bernard, out in New York. We got Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Montreal, great city. Had some great times in Montreal. Been there with Satish. New Orleans, Dallas, Tampa, the list keeps going. Anyways, let's jump into it and let's give everybody what they came here for. I'm super excited to have both you gentlemen on as guests. I think that one of the topics that continues to come up all the time in more modern analytics operations is this concept of data ops. So you're seeing even established analysts like Gartner start to talk about it more and more. There's been massive growth in the DevOps category for software engineering, and we're now starting to see that get appropriated over to data into what is now being classified as data ops. I got a few questions to kick things off. I think the first one, just for everybody here, would be great to hear your definition of what actually is data ops in the first place. So I will let you answer first, Collin, and then we can let Chris take it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, nobody on this call knows, but I do come from a background in software engineering and worked as an API engineer in the health IT space for quite a while. Got my start with AWS and obviously was really deeply engraved in the software development lifecycle for a long time. And to me, data ops is really this notion of taking the processes and practices from agile methodologies to improve the quality of execution, the speed of execution, and the level of collaboration that occurs within data teams, really taking a lot of the inspiration from what the software engineering world sort of laid the path for. So, and doing that obviously is meant to help, break down data silos within an organization, but ultimately create a continuous iterative flow that can be measured against and improved upon, as opposed to more of a, say, waterfall approach, which is probably a term most people on this call know.
Yep. And Chris, I love that. I love that definition. What about you, Chris? What would you like to add?
I think, I think just touching on where DataOps was born. It was born from that DevOps and the development world. It had the technology, and because everyone coded things, it worked with that approach. And the data world had to catch up, and I think now the technology has allowed the ability to bring those producers and consumers of that data together. and create that DataOps variation of what DevOps provided, which is bringing the development and operation teams together, with shifting that across. I mean, when I first, the products out there in the data world didn't really support that DataOps approach originally. They had repositories where you're putting your code into it, which was proprietary. You couldn't do that verifying the different the versions and it be visually be able to check. So I think the technology now has moved on to allow that way of working in the data world. And I think this is what we're trying to do now is to bring that the ways of working aspect of it, of educating the teams that you should be adopting this as your first port of call. This is a de facto approach for building your pipelines now.
It seems to me like one of the most attractive aspects about DataOps is being able to continuously release and move through the evolvement and evolution of your analytics pipelines and workflows in a way that's seamless. You're able to separate the work, merge it together, take an approach that's constantly evolving, since the data is always dynamic. You're always figuring out different questions and different answers that lead to different questions. And so it leans into that a lot more so than a waterfall approach like you described earlier, Collin, where you're just like trying to go step after step after step. And then by the time you're 4 steps in, you realize you have to go back to step 1 and start back over and can continue. And so it makes total sense. Right before this, we were talking about the difference between DevOps and DataOps. How would you encapsulate that in an easy way to understand for the audience here, since they are different things at the end of the day? I think if you were to take everything from a DevOps approach and try to appropriate to DataOps, it probably wouldn't be the best idea. So curious to hear what differences you see between the two.
The key things in the data part is that the DevOps part is less about the data, it's more about the functionality of the code for it to actually all hang together. But the DataOps world, the code doesn't work unless the data actually tells the story you're wanting it to. So there's a much bigger focus on DataOps of making sure we touched on a bit, test data, appropriate environments for it as well. Because you can have a pipeline that moves hello world from one place to another. You haven't really tested it unless you actually put it through with some proper data. Whereas applications, you could get away with that mocking and simulating activities from an application perspective, but you never had to have that volume of data that was representative, because the applications create the data, whereas we're relying on that data to be provided to us.
Well, it's also a matter of when we talk about quality of execution too, right? Like DevOps blends together like the engineering side of the house, the development side of the house, and operations. This notion of like, what do we do with what we develop? DataOps really is that blending of data producers and consumers within an organization, whether those consumers are internal or external, and removing those silos. But back to what Chris was talking about, think of how long in the data space we've been comfortable with pushing changes directly to production, right? We've been okay.
Never done that. Never.
Yeah, no one else. Let's call it the elephant in the room. Like that still is a really common practice within organizations. If you did that in the world of software, you would be without a job. But it's still seen as like, okay, it's a little taboo, but we kind of don't have a better option in the data space. And I think that the best thing that can come out of DataOps is predictability, repeatability, and that sort of continuous evolution that can occur within these systems to remove that. Like anytime there's a finger on a mouse in production, I start sweating. So if we can take that out of the equation, we're in a much better position as an industry.
That is always crazy to me that there's no concept of like dev QA prod in so many different companies. Usually smaller companies or less experienced developers are just pushing stuff to prod all the time.
I think this thing is two things that have changed. So when I started, the data warehouse was too expensive normally to have a DR version of it. So you didn't have, or you were less likely to have multiple environments because it was too costly. And the other thing, it was always a downstream process. And the birth of like reverse ETL, even though I hate the term, but having that feedback loop that actually takes you back into the operational decisioning means that now your data is mission critical. It is part of your operational business now. And we've moved now from it being the BI world of, okay, let's report on what's happened. Now it's actually reporting on, well, making decisions of what you want to happen, or prescriptive analysis. And as soon as you've got that link back into your operational business or your business services, you've got to start having these data ops practices that ensures that what you're delivering is quality, because you could be pumping something back for that reverse ETL into your CRM, and that could have a catastrophic effects on brand awareness, on brand reputation, or even monetary thing. You could put a campaign out to everyone that you give them all a discount and they weren't meant to. So there's a lot of risk now, which wasn't quite there but before the more modern era. And I think some of the people are still using they've come from those environments, and they've just carried on in the same way, and that's one of the pitfalls, I think, which we're going to cover a bit.
Yeah, we'll definitely cut into this. By the way, if the audience has any questions about data ops in general, or anything for Collin or Chris or Satish or I, feel free to leave a comment. But I know, Satish, it seems like you got something to add here on what Chris and Collin were talking about. Love to hear it.
Yeah, I just want to kind of, I can't agree more. First thing, what we touched upon, the quality, the cost, the way I see it, and I know some people may be new to this, and that's probably why they are here.
Yeah.
But let's say we don't have DevOps or DataOps. Then what are the problems that we were facing? Like, why did we even start this process in the first place? So if you look at it, software development was very, very expensive. If to go from the requirement to build that, it was very expensive. Now, how do you reduce the cost? How do you shrink that cycle? You got to have, for example, you got to have version control. If you don't have version control, obviously, you don't know what version you're deploying. You need to have testing. So you need to have test cases that run, and then there are certain best practices and all of that come later. But just to understand the concept, there's two main drivers. One is the cost, in my opinion, cost of development. And the second thing is, of course, quality. And that applies to whether you're building an application or you're building a data application where your focus is all on data. At the end of the day, that's the goal, right? The value that you bring to the business as efficiently as you can. That's the main driver.
Just on that, that's something that resonates with us. I use the term delivery friction. So frictional use is a way to describe the time, effort, and complexity to achieve a particular task. And that speed to value part, and this is, speed is of the essence now, getting released out quicker, getting better throughput of your team, getting that business value quicker. Having that approach it's going to accelerate the ultimate business value and the cost. So the more you can optimize and reduce friction and take away, and I think the other thing is you need to look at where you do that friction, because there's no point automating doing a turnkey solution on your infrastructure that only gets set up maybe once or 2 months or every 3 months, but maybe on your data consumption code where you've got a metadata model that's being used by your reporting tools. There's more business logic going into it. It's changing regularly. You want to make sure that is turnkey as possible with the least amount of friction, because that's happening more frequent. So focus the effort on where you get the most value. There's no point having every single piece automated from day one. It's working out which bits are your pain point.
That makes sense. There's a question here around what is the difference between data ops and data engineer or data engineering. I feel like they go hand in hand. I don't know about you guys, but basically a data engineer is somebody who should adhere to a data ops framework versus it being something that's segmented out. You agree with that?
For sure. It's just like in the software engineering world. First of all, shout out to Port Elizabeth, South Africa. I see Joburg, I see Cape Town, Western Cape. I spent a lot of time.
People all over the world came to listen to you, Collin.
For sure. Yeah, that's it. No, but I think, the primary distinction, right? Let's use the concept of data pipelines, right? How do we get data out of our source systems and into a unified source of truth within an environment? Whereas your data engineers are going to be the tacticians in that role, and usually the ones setting up those pipelines and ensuring the integrity of those pipelines, right? Are we getting the right data out, the right table with the right refresh, everything like that? Data ops folks are going to focus on the operational components of that system, right? How frequently are we refreshing? How frequently do we have error cycles? And really taking one step above and being able to analyze all of their pipeline flows in aggregate to make sure that back end product, right, within the data ecosystem is working as intended. So really, it's in my perspective, it's boots on the ground, turning wrenches from an engineering standpoint, and the data ops folks are really gonna look at numbers and statistics and latency rates and things like that to ensure that things are well tuned and delivering according to expectations.
Yep.
Yeah, I see it as like a spectrum from one end to the other. So I think data engineering has fragmented itself as well. So you've got your analytics engineers, you've got your data engineers that are more focused on the ingest, and you've got your data engineers that are more focused on the data modeling. And then there's a unicorn that does it all. And they're becoming rarer and rarer. So yeah, as you said, Collin, that first one, it's that foundational pieces that the data ops person that puts in the plumbing first of all, and then after that, your data engineer first of all is one turning on the tap, putting the stuff in, and then your analytics engineer is making sure that is turned into what the consumer needs in a way that that meets their requirements. So we got another question about MLOps and DataOps as well.
Yeah, what's the difference between MLOps and DataOps? Who wants to take that?
Yeah, I think that's when you talk about I think they're cousins of one another, right? But I think when you talk about the process of beginning to deploy machine learning models, there comes a sort of different line in the sand around the how you simplify that management and deployment of those models. Frequently, you're running quite a few models that are in sort of testing phases, and you're tweaking them individually, right? Testing different algorithms against standards. So in my mind, that's almost like it's like French and Spanish, right? Like they're sentences are similarly constructed, but it's a slightly different language. And to Chris's point, right, we have so many needs from a domain expertise perspective already, and I can't imagine what it's going to look like 5 years from now, where you sort of do have to segment those because there just aren't people out there who are pros in engineering, data ops, ML ops, AI ops, ops, right? So that's where I think a clean distinction, because it typically is treated as a separate product.
Yep.
Yeah, and you can't go MLOps until you've got DataOps in place. Otherwise, don't walk. Yeah, don't try and run before you can walk. And as you said, Collin, so I think the thing that the biggest additional that comes in the MLOps is the testing of the regression analysis of what that algorithm's doing, and making sure that it's going to get a better Gini score, a better result based on what you've done. You don't want to release something that's going to be worse than what's there already. Whereas the data quality checks are a little easier. You're verifying completeness and consistency. The MLOps, it's actually the algorithm. You're making sure it's improved from what was there before. And then if it doesn't, don't release it. So that's part of your test framework of ensuring that your route to live has those checkpoints in there to make sure you don't put any rubbish into production.
Yeah, we were just at the both Satish and I were just at the Gartner conference for representing Coalesce, and it's so interesting to see how many booths and vendors had something around MLOps or AI, which is completely negligent to the underlying most important aspect, which is the foundation of the data that those technologies pull from. And so we see questions around, differences between MLOps, DataOps, or how do we get to MLOps and do it successfully? The first step is to actually get a grasp on what you're doing with the underlying data. And so I feel like it's in a sequential order, MLOps will become more popular as people can gather themselves and figure out how to approach data warehousing, data projects, incorporating DataOps in the right way that will actually allow people to get to AI and ML use cases. But from my perspective, I don't know about you guys, I think we still got a little ways to go before people are super happy with data projects, which is why we're here at the end of the day to talk about some of these.
Yeah, we've got this analogy that I use often, which is everyone wants to build a house.
Mm-hmm.
And they're excited about the walls they can put up. And this is going to be the primary bedroom. This is going to be the game room. But no one's spending enough time actually pouring the concrete slab and laying the joists, right? Like we all talk about what, and frankly, right, I do think it's a product of, right, if you go onto my LinkedIn feed right now, you'd think that we're all using quantum machine learning like successfully, right? And it's this whole notion of like, you need to be further ahead than you are. And so people do try and short circuit that conversation. And what they do is they build walls of that room, and that might work in a singular fashion. But as soon as you try and build on top of that or add a roof, things fall down pretty quickly. And to me, that's where we get a lot of people who reach out to us and go, we want to become machine learning oriented. We have this great idea for how, MLOps or, algorithms can help us. And the first question that we usually ask is, all right, do you trust your data today from a descriptive perspective? Does it do everything you want it to do from a foundational perspective? Well, no. Okay, define no. Well, it's not even close. Okay, let's focus on that, because as soon as you add that machine learning speed into there, garbage in, garbage out becomes compounded and magnified, right? So that's really that foundational integrity that anybody who knows me has heard me say that at least 20 times since they've known me. Foundational integrity is everything. And unfortunately, it's the most boring piece of data and analytics, right, these days. But I think it's the singular most important facet of successfully developing a data program.
For sure. I love the analogy of comparing it to the foundation of a house. Everybody wants to, paint the walls, decorate, have nice furniture, but you don't want to do that on a house of cards. So you want to make sure you have the strong foundational layer, which is really the core aspects of data warehousing in general and all the transformations that go on to get that raw data to the point that it's consumable with proper documentation and lineage, with appropriate workflows and the ability to perform CI/CD in the right way and deploy iteratively. So from that point, of course, other things can follow, but it takes some time to get there. And I feel like it's becoming, it was a less sexy thing. It's becoming a lot more sexy now to focus on the foundation of data, which is great. I think for a while, people were distracted by a lot of the business intelligence tools or things that could just paint a picture without really thinking about where that data was coming from, how it actually got prepared. And so the market evolves and starts to pay attention to certain things like this, which is nice to see. So hopefully MLOps or AI can help drive that even further as people continue to go through these projects and hopefully don't fall on their face trying to perform something when it's premature from data sets that are accurate.
It's building trust, isn't it? So the more we can do to build trust in what we're doing and create repeatability, the more people are going to buy into it, support it, give you funding for it, and they're going to be getting I keep going back to value. They're getting that value quicker, which is what it's all about. We all love playing with technology, but it's for a reason. We're all running businesses, and if you work for another company, that company needs to make money as well. So the whole purpose is providing that value, and how we can discuss what the term value actually means, but yeah, making the business progress in a very simple way.
Satish, were you going to add something there?
I think Chris mentioned it, exactly what I was going to say as well, the trust, right? I mean, what's happening, people are taking shortcuts and, they skip the foundation, they go straight into some kind of analytics, whether it's machine learning or something, and then they share that with the business, and the business goes, oh, wow, this is exciting. And they start using it. And this is crap. How did you get this? And I don't trust this. And then now you have to start over, all over. You're back to square one. So that's what's happening. And that's why people are now, coming back to focusing on the foundation.
Yeah. it's crazy to see the loss of trust if the consumers, aren't, they don't agree with what's being produced, or there's some issues that they know of that are anecdotal or personal to them. And then you start to have a bit of tension between the producers and the consumers. And you really do have to start over from square one, but almost like square -1, because you're working back to just build that interpersonal relationship between consumers. So I feel like
I think another is getting the business need to be working with you much closer with you for that data ops, because I mean there's the BAU activities and there's your innovation activities, and without the business, we're just technologists, and we'll build something nice and shiny, but is it going to actually add that value? We don't know that. We may think we do, but the people in the business live it, and being able to articulate that and then feed that back through. So your data ops, part of your different channels of your data ops, coming through, and it's one release into production. It's not someone doing some tactical stuff, and they'll end up just going and building it on their own somewhere else, and it never comes back into that single place. And going back to that trust, if someone looks at a figure, the CEO looks at a figure and say, "What? That's how many customers I got." But this report over here tells me I've got 1,000 more customers. Why? They've classified customers in a different way. One's sites, one's not, and that to get that trust back is much harder. So once it's gone, it takes a lot longer to get back.
Yeah. So for the audience, make sure if you have an answer for a question, you know exactly how you got that answer, basically.
Yeah.
Right. You want to be able to quickly produce how you got to that answer while you're working with the consumers in real time. So that way, if there is a discrepancy, at least you know why that discrepancy exists. I think that's like certain reason why people love Calm Lineage, for example, to be able to produce and trace back how you get to certain results and questions. I think it's also great, Collin, Chris, you both run your own consulting organizations between Leading Edge IT and between North Labs, very different approaches. I think with the data concierge approach, Collin, you can kind of be that resource for a business to have their data operations be run through North Labs exclusively and build that foundation in a way that will then unlock the future of other avenues that a business would want to perform different data operations or ML operations. Whereas Chris, it's more of a conventional consulting arrangement where you guys go in and bring your expertise in a different way, but like on the client with their data. So I'm super curious to hear, the main reason everybody came to this show is around the pitfalls of data ops, but how would you describe, one of the main items that you see being a bottleneck or an issue in data ops when it comes to some of the clients that you both work with? What's the first one that comes to mind?
The first, we touched on it earlier, it's the environment one. The environment, and I got environment drift as well. So there's no point having a release process that it doesn't go through dev, test, prod. If you're in test, it's not representative data. So we talked about earlier, just going and releasing things into production. There's no point you having a scenario where the first time something's going to work is by the time it gets into production. You need to have that reassurance, have that test harness, and then only after that it gets through. So I think that's they're probably all quite weighty, but that's the one that always jumps out to me as the first one. I've got other favorites as well, but I'm going to let Collin have one.
What about you, Collin?
Yeah, no, I think the main one, and again, right, we were talking earlier, we could give a 12-hour talk on
for
this
sure.
But to me, I'm going to take it even one step more elementary, right? Where Chris's background and strength comes in is definitely on the engineering process build out and things like that. My background has always been in executive alignment first, right? How do you get buy-in from your data and analytics leadership to convince them that this is a good route to travel down? Because let's be frank here, typically data and analytics modernization efforts in businesses today are done without buy-in from the executive team. They're done sort of off in a corner. hey, Armon, look what we built. Armon says, that's awesome. I want more of that. Go build it. But there's no direction in terms of what does success look like and everything like that. So for me, it's the solving of incomplete or non-existent, what we call key business questions or KBQs, right? We can talk about data ops until we're blue in the face. But if we're building our data ops processes that aren't in alignment with key business questions that mix business impact that we can measure. Hey, we know that if we can become 12% more efficient at, scrap reduction within our manufacturing, methodologies, right? We can add $1 million a year to the bottom line. Great. But it's not just impact, it's also activation. And what I mean by that is once we get insights from the data environment, can we do anything about it? And that's where most organizations fall flat, is when you're building it without executive alignment. The idea is let's solve the most grandiose problem possible that might have really cool future impact. But if we can't activate on those insights today and actually take action on what we're seeing, there is no positive ROI that comes with that. And what you have instead is a very expensive R&D experiment because there isn't measurable business value tied to it. So for me, you would be shocked how many conversations I have where, we want to have, modernized data and analytics. Why? What's the first question we're trying to solve? Well, we just want to get all of our data in there and then we'll figure it out. That is from where you ought to be. It should be agile, iterative, so you can get to this position of quality, reliability, and proper governance. Because to me, those are the key. Somebody asked in the questions, what are the key sort of platform features or requirements of successful data ops? It's those three. It's quality of insights, it's reliability of execution, and it's governance around the entire process.
I love listening to you talk, Collin, especially because it's always around the core issue associated with the business and how you apply data to solve that versus the other way around. A lot of times you see data teams that they don't know what or why they're doing what they're doing. It's more so just them operating in a silo and hoping that the data they produce is going to be consumed in a way that's insightful for the stakeholders. But it's so much better, so much easier if you start from what are we actually trying to accomplish here with our data before we go into the project. And that way, I mean, they say, the failure rate of data warehouse projects is always super high. I think it's largely because there isn't clear communication between what we're trying to accomplish. So
it's that business versus IT, and I always go back to that. It's you need a data community that both of those teams, that both of those departments are part of, and as soon as they start all working together, it becomes much easier. And I think to your point there, Collin, I did a concept of like the KPIs I talked about is every KPI you have in a company needs to be assessed of why it's being used. Is it linked to your business strategy? What's the quality of it? If it's not linked to your business strategy, why are you measuring it? If no one's actually using it, there's no point having it anyway, because it's obviously maybe your business strategy has not got the right KPIs. So I love that approach. Everything we should do, it should be linked to your company's business strategy. And if it's not, your business strategy is wrong, and you've got pockets of people in your organization that are not lined up.
You got it. To me, to go back to the house analogy, because any of my members who are on this call know that I beat analogies to death. But to me, we talked about building walls or building rooms without foundation. But what's the most important aspect of when you decide to build a house? Like, what's the first thing you consider? It's location, right? Location. And to me, that's the equivalent of a key business question, right? Where are we going to point? Where are we going to build this oriented toward initially, right? To produce the most value with that foundation we're going to lay and those walls we're going to build and everything like that. Because I could build a really nice house on a tiny island with no infrastructure and killer bees, and it could be the nicest house ever, and no one would want to visit that house, right? Or I could build it in some beautiful suburban community, and everybody goes, "Oh, what a great house you have!" that to me is the equivalent of, are we aligned from a key business question perspective?
I love that. What other pitfalls you guys see? Common pitfalls, certain things that hold a team back from being able to be successful with data ops or just data in general?
I think it's that having a team that can have autonomy to achieve what they want as a unit. As soon as you don't have the right skills in that team, and you've got to then go and request something from someone else on the team, or wait for them to be available to do it, you're not agile. You know, you've added dependencies into it. You've nearly gone waterfall because you're waiting for and whenever you're doing planning, you never plan for those dependencies. So having a team that has all the right skills and the right privileges to do what they need to do is essential. Yeah.
Basically, having the autonomy to perform their jobs. You feel like that's a gap in certain organizations where
you'll have someone that looks after your S3 buckets, has got to do the privileges on that, and then have to go through a form to go fill it in. You've got someone that knows Kubernetes that needs it to do deployment of one piece. And as soon as you start having that sort of like dependencies across different people that aren't in your own team that you can plan accordingly,
right?
You've created lots of uncertainty and risk and added risk to the ability for you to deliver.
Yeah, it's kind of like the antithesis of the whole process, right? Like forces you down again, like what Collin was describing of a waterfall approach. If you've got to wait for so many different steps to happen in that sequence before you can actually do your job. Collin, were you going to add something?
I was, with my own pitfall, but I think they're so closely related that it doesn't make sense to introduce the topic. My next one was, and this is there again. I come from a software engineering background, so any of you engineers out there, I don't mean to offend you, but the of constantly chasing features and functionality, right? Because let's be frank, Coalesce is one of the best tools on the market for data ops, and that's me saying that. I have no right. Armon is not paying me to say that, right? But there's this notion of if any of you all have seen the data and analytics sort of landscape that I think it's the folks at FirstMark put out every year.
That Matt Turk.
Mm-hmm.
Matt Turk. That ecosystem is expanding faster than our own universe. And so there's this notion of, as engineers, we love to build. We love to build, right? I was the kid who took apart my bike as a kid and couldn't figure out a way to get it back together. So I'd have to get my real engineer dad to come help me out, right? But when you have so many tools being introduced into an ecosystem, it's really easy to get distracted by features as opposed to actual business needs. As in, what do we need right now to solve our key business questions? Because it's really, really simple these days to say, I swipe my credit card, I get a Snowflake instance. I swipe my credit card, I could begin using any of these 200 tools within AWS. That's fantastic, but it is a double-edged sword, I think. And I think that's where a lot of the inefficiencies that lead to the demise of data ops programs come in is people think, well, now I just need this, and now I just need this. Hey, what about a catalog? Hey, what about reverse ETL? Let's focus on maximizing the capabilities we have, right? And keep it as simple as possible in the near term, and only adding features and functionality when we as a team agree, hey, we've run into our current ceiling from a functionality standpoint. We're trying to get over here. Now we do need to add these capabilities into the sort of mix, right? Being as agile and iterative as possible, even with tool selection, to me is really paramount for organizations to find success, because we go into a lot of organizations where they're like, oh yeah, we bought these 12 tools, and none of them will get implemented.
There's so many operational issues with buying that many technologies and trying to implement them all at the same time. I know, Satish, you always advise every customer at Coalesce to focus on the low-hanging fruit, get quick wins, get the value as fast as possible. I think both Collin and Chris, the reason your businesses have been so successful is because you focus on the similar thing. Whether it's through the data concierge and doing that for the customer, or actually going in-house and saying, what are the quick wins we can deliver value on leading edge IT, and then really focusing on automating that process, trying to get to that in an as accelerated fashion as possible, which is something that from our end, I feel like similar to how you're describing the death by 1,000 cuts with a ton of different tools and trying to implement them all at the same time. You've got this issue of people trying to do too much or too big of a project without just getting to value quickly and trying to do something that's gonna get a quick win and build the trust between the consumers and the producers of data. And then from there, being able to focus on some of the more bigger action items as you scale and grow between that relationship of the business and the IT team versus it being business versus the IT team.
Yeah.
Chris talked about earlier. It's really easy, I think, as an engineer to lose sight of some of those lower hanging fruit, smaller, quicker wins and want to go focus on the big issue, that 12-month data project. But for 11 months, the consumers don't see anything. And so they're getting frustrated. And they're like, where the hell is the stuff that we asked for? And it drives them crazy. And then that's kind of turns into a bit of a snowball effect where you're working against yourself versus, similar to how we operate at Coalesce, we're delivering new features and bug fixes, enhancements all the time. And then we have a major release, every quarter or a couple quarters, but there's so many things that happen in between that time. Yeah. And that's kind of similar to how a data project should roll as well. You don't want to be just big bang every time. You want to be able to release certain things, as you go that just continue to add value for everybody, whether that's your customer or your data consumer. So I think that's one other area that people lose sight of all the time.
Yeah, I see there's a message going about automation. Yeah, I think that's the key thing is to make everything as turnkey as possible. But I go back to the friction reference I made earlier is automate where you get the value, and then we'll gradually level up in different areas. I've seen too many times where someone goes and solves a problem over here, but they're pushing the problem over there. So look at the whole end-to-end process that you're trying to do. Until the data is accessible and being used by the consumer, you haven't actually got any value. You can build the most fastest pipeline in the world, the best, neatest code as well. But until someone's actually using the data that it's produced, you haven't completed your task. So always look at the whole, what's the end goal? And I think that goes back down to that business involvement. The business wants to get the ability to make better decisions. And if you don't satisfy that objective, you're just bringing in source data for no reason at all and not modeling it, and it becomes a liability, not an asset, because you've got to manage it, secure it, pay for storage, all that. So which isn't that much, but it's and unless you've got it for a reason, then why are you doing it?
Yeah. I think you also should be purchasing technologies in the appropriate order, right? Like, I talked to Reverse ETL CEO a month or two ago, and he was like, our solution is only as good as the data that it's pulling from. And so it's like, okay, well then as you go through the process of your analytics journey, once you have the data in a nice, clean format that's consumable with proper documentation, lineage, is accurate, the data consumers are happy, then procure something that's going to push that back into your CRM or Marketo versus trying to get, reverse ETL tool, an observability tool, data quality tool, all at the same time and trying to keep, 6 plates spinning. Do it in the order that it actually matters to the business versus just going out and trying to get every technology under the sun and expecting it's all going to work at the push of a button. I think there's a lot more work that goes into it, and you want to do it at the right times versus just doing it to do it. So,
speaking of, go ahead, Satish.
Just somewhat of a tactical question, but we see this a lot. There's a lot of companies out there that are, kind of still learning about DevOps and DataOps and things like that.
Yeah.
So for those companies, that don't have this, this skill set or this practice, what do we recommend? How do they ramp up? How do they build that muscle? What are the steps that they need to take to get that, that process in place?
I'm going to do a selfish plug. You buy one of our DataOps assessments where you come in and we'll assess how it is. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously two approaches. I mean, you either get the skills in-house and then you focus on that, and that needs to have, to Colin's point, that business or CEO engagement, saying we're doing this. I'm supporting it. Go and train my team up so we can actually do this. And the other one is you get it as a service. You go Colin's concierge service. I mean, I'm sure that they'll provide that DataOps as part of it. Or you go for that, taking your own team on the journey. And your internal team's going to have all that business knowledge. They're going to know how to request things. They're going to know how to navigate your own company. Having someone in there to help upskill them, take them on the journey, hold their hand while they're on there, and then let them go when they're, or take the stabilizers off. You use some analogies, Colin, like on a little bike, and now they're on their own. They can take the stabilizers off and they can ride off into the sunset. So, you've got a few options. You got to go train up, or you buy in.
I think there's a fine line to balance. It's a great question, Satish, and I think it's a high dollar question, right? Once we figure out how to get it exactly right for every organization. But the trade-off, right, of first of all, what I will say is most organizations focus too much on the activation component of their data before focusing on the foundational pieces. So a lot of organizations that we come into may have hired a data scientist or two, and those data scientists have de facto data engineers because our data scientist sits down at her desk on day one and goes, okay, great, give me the data to do what I do best.
Right.
And they, what are you talking about? You need to go assemble all that. And she goes, well, this isn't going to work out for the long term, right? So there's that sort of core requisite. The other piece is when you look at those Gartner statistics, right? So we talked already about 87% failure rates and things like that. The other sort of sneaky statistic that I think matters maybe more is when organizations are successful with implementing a data program, over 80% of their internal team's time is spent on what we call undifferentiated heavy lifting. That is tasks and processes that need to occur on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that add no direct value to our key business questions or business impact in general. So I think there's a line for organizations to figure out how to balance between how do we take all of our people along on this journey, because that's great to get people up to speed on how to think in a data-driven fashion and how to make your business more, reliable from a data perspective. But there's also that notion of, okay, if out of all the things we could do, should we be doing all of it? So that to me is a sort of key distinction, and it's different for everyone, right? That line moves slightly. Smaller organizations are different from large enterprise, for example. So that to me is important, and it goes back to what Mandla was saying around automation. Yes, but right, like let's focus on taking the smallest bite of the elephant as possible and getting a quick win, as opposed to what you called out earlier, Armon, around a 12 to 18 month value thesis. My sort of rule of thumb is if you haven't delivered some bit of value within the first 3 months, but definitely 6 months, you're behind. And it can be small, but if it's quality, it's reliable, and it's trustworthy from a governance perspective, that's a win, and your team can feed off of that, and it's going to cause a lot of light bulbs to go off in terms of what could we be doing next with these capabilities.
Totally, it's super interesting to talk about it in the span of how quickly you can get these wins. It's one of the reasons we're so passionate about our mission at Coalesce, which is being able to automate as much of the transformation processes as possible. Like, I think a big reason why a lot of these projects fail is because that's such a manual, time-consuming, tedious overhead that you were talking about earlier, about 80% of the work just being almost unnecessary things that could be automated for their users, but aren't, and subjected to some type of hand coding or manual processes that aren't efficient. And so, sure, if you have a 12-month project and 85% of them fail, it would be so much better to be able to get to that failure within 2 months, iterate, and then get to something that is successful within 4 or 5 months where the business is actually happy. And compressing those timelines is what we're really focused on at Coalesce, not necessarily as much from the workflow perspective. Obviously, Coalesce is a DataOps tool and lends into DataOps best practices, but we're passionate about compressing timelines so people can actually get to value faster compared to any other alternative, which seems to be one of the biggest culprits to why projects fail in the first place. It's just, it takes so much freaking time to get through some of these bigger areas. And so I'm seeing some questions from the audience right now. It's a little bit later than this was asked, but I think it's so in line with what we've been discussing, which is how do you balance getting the buy-in and alignment with getting something out quickly and building the trust? What is your approach to doing that? Collin, I feel like you both are masters at this.
So I'm going to do a consultant. It depends, but it is that balancing act and understanding where they are on their journey or their maturity, but also you don't want to go down to that tactical route because you never get it back. So knowing the direction you're going to, and then technical debt. I always like to go back to technical debt. Don't make sure that you build enough or factor in the fact you need to go back and redo things you've already done. Otherwise, you're just diverging away from where you need to go, and you're going to add friction later because you haven't done everything in the correct way. And projects hate paying for technical debt. And I think I'm talking about having I'm doing a book with Matt Housley at the moment about business value and monetization. And
Nice.
we talk about how you can actually fund these projects, and it's tough to do that. And I think if you're able to evidence that because we've gone and done this activity, we've saved this amount of time, value, help funders again. So I think Collin, you took the low hanging fruit. You need to find something that goes and gets that business value, that goes and gets you that budget to come back to fuel that innovation, fuel the technical debt, and then keep you providing a service that all the teams use. I think another problem I see out there is no one wants to pay for foundational stuff. Right? And normally it's the first project that comes along, and why is it costing so much? So we got to build all these things. But the second, third, and fourth project, which could be a different department, benefits from it. So going back to that community thing I talked about, the more that you're all working together, finance, customer, supply chain, all those departments know that, am I going to benefit from that framework you built? Yeah, you are. Let's club together, put in that tax or whatever it is on your foundations that fuel that funding that builds us a capability that everyone goes and uses. Again, the community, start with the community is one of the critical things, I think.
Collin, I'm super curious to hear how you approach it. Given you got the data concierge business at North Labs, you probably leaning into those conversations with your customers right from the get-go. How does that typically start, or what's your angle? What's your pitch? How do you build that? How do you get that in alignment quickly and build that trust? Like, what are some of the key things you focus on, or the way you approach it?
Yeah, a couple things, and for the record, the majority of the work that we do at North Labs is for small and mid-market organizations who are considered greenfield. So they're either getting started on this for the first time, or they've tried it on their own previously and have failed in some capacity. Right. And so for us, it's about really setting what we define as a North Star or a cornerstone use case, right? So getting alignment from the executive team in terms of why are we here and why do we care about what we're doing? Those are very simple questions to ask that a lot of people don't take the time to ask. right? Why do we as the executive team want to develop these capabilities, and what will it do for the business? That's really important. The second piece is, at North Labs, we're a little different in that we build almost every customer's environment in the exact same way every time, because in my experience, whether you're a manufacturing organization, a retail organization, or a healthcare organization, 80% of your data environment looks, if you stand across the street and squint, 80% of every organization's data environment looks the same. It's that last 20% where your last mile analytics come in and where your use case is pointed, right? But that 80% that's driving, ingestion and transformation and scheduling and orchestration, those things are repeatable. And so for us, we actually use an automation engine because we're building things the same way every time. When we get started on the foundational component for a customer, we spend the majority of the time on those key business questions, those cornerstone use cases, because when we press go, we can actually automate the standing up of that customer's environment with Snowflake, with Coalesce, with AWS, with Taboola, et cetera, via API integration and things like that. So we can have the environment stood up in the matter of a day, as opposed to 6 or 8 weeks or sometimes longer, depending on the services provider. So we get to start down the road of proving that measurable business impact right away. And again, this notion of how do you balance getting the buy-in, and then to Philip's question, how does the conversation go when you inform a leadership team that they need to slow down? Hopefully your work around developing that cornerstone use case has been such that you've looked several of the executives in the face and said, all of this work that you need to do manually in Excel once a week, that's taking 20 hours a week of your time, will now be automated, of higher quality, and well-governed across your team. Hopefully that becomes a hell yeah, right? In terms of getting that buy-in. And by the way, if they're already doing that work manually, say in Excel, you essentially are given a spec. Talk about building a home, right? If they're coding out these formulas in Excel, you have the cheat sheet to short circuit that data ops workflow to say, if I can make the data look like this in an automated fashion, we've produced high quality, trustworthy data, and we can match the two together and keep track of that over time. Perhaps even having that executive run that Excel workload for the next couple of weeks to ensure that what we're doing stays on trend. But that's a great way to start, is to look for those areas, to not try and push the envelope from an innovation perspective, but if you can find a way to free up 20 hours a week of your executive team's time, that's a massive win, not just from a salary, cost savings perspective, but from an opportunity cost perspective that's really cherished within the executive suite.
Yep.
You don't remove 100% of the exec's work, because otherwise they won't have a job and they won't be happy. Leave a little bit to do still.
That would be pretty impressive if the data team could just eliminate the exec's job.
Yeah, we're a ways out.
I should watch out, right, Satish? We only got a couple minutes left. I really love what you're talking about, Collin, around having that 80% rule when it comes to the development pipeline frameworks. I feel like, one other pitfall I would say about data ops, or just in general data teams, is just the lack of knowledge of traditional data warehousing concepts, and like why, Collin, you're able to just implement something that is streamlined and repeatable over and over again. It's crazy to me to walk into some of the smaller companies or less mature analytics operations, and they're not even familiar with like what a star schema is, for example. And like really going through the process of making sure that you're adhering to the best practices of data warehousing in general, instead of getting too caught up with the data ops processes, because that's all framework driven for actual deployment, not necessarily development. And so making sure that you go step by step and focus on all these items is really, really important to be successful.
If you don't have the basics done, right? I played baseball for a long time growing up, and it's always back to fundamentals. In golf, it's always back to fundamentals. If your roles and account structure inside of your data warehouse aren't set up correctly, if you don't have a solid governance structure, if you don't know how to optimize cost with your warehouses with something as simple to do so like Snowflake, and you can't keep eyes on that, you're in a position where there's plenty of work to do there before you begin implementing an operational framework around DataOps. Because to Chris's earlier point, the more automation you add, the more potential there is for pitfalls, right? Because garbage in becomes garbage out magnified, and that's really what gets a lot of customers stuck.
Cool. We're right at time. I'm so glad to have you both on the Coffee with Coalesce, gentlemen. Chris Tabb, Collin Graves. Great audience questions today. Such a blast. As you saw, people from all over the world tune into this. Looking forward to the next one. So thanks everybody for hopping on. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Collin. Thank you, Satish. We'll let everybody get back to their day or evening, depending on where you're at. And,
I'm off to the pub.
That's right. Cool. Awesome.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Been great. Cheers.